Thank you. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for setting the stage, and Samantha for introducing me. I never know what to do when people read out my bio, but I'm really, really happy to be here. Good morning, wherever you are, or good afternoon, or good evening. And welcome to today's webinar session on ethical AI in today's world. I hope you are nearly as excited as I am, because I'm really, really excited. As Samantha has said, this is the fourth webinar session that we are having in our series. And this series is embodying conscious leadership and global solidarity. And so before we begin our exploration of ethical AI, before you get a chance to meet our incredible panelists, I'm just going to take a minute to set the stage, and then I will invite our four panelists who will be sharing their wisdom with us today. And so about 2 weeks ago, I had the privilege of meeting our panelists. And during our icebreaker session, we asked the question, how do you define artificial intelligence in your mother tongue or in your local language? So in case English is not your first language, if you can please put it in the chat, how do you define artificial intelligence in your local language or in your mother tongue? And I'll just give like 5 seconds, and then as responses are streaming in, I'll proceed. So in case you don't know, you can also be like, that's homework for tonight. Yeah. Any responses that we have in the chat? Okay, so out of about 42 of us, we don't have anyone who's able to define artificial intelligence in their local language or mother tongue. The reason, John has given us an answer. If you can please say the language within which you have defined it, that would also be really helpful. We can all learn something. But the reason this is really important is because if we cannot describe these powerful technologies, these innovations to our community members who speak diverse and different languages, the question we then have to ask ourselves is, who are we leaving behind as we progress? If the language of innovation at its foundation is excluding millions of people, are we really progressing? Yeah. And so this question lies at the heart of the discussion that we're going to be having today. In a world where these algorithms are increasingly determining who gets opportunities, who receives resources, and whose voices are being amplified, ethical AI is not just a technical consideration that we need to be making. Yeah. It's a matter of justice, it's a matter of dignity, and it's a matter of how we as the human population flourish together. So the theme of our webinar series, as had been mentioned earlier today, is conscious leadership and global solidarity. And you'll find that in a lot of the responses, in a lot of the conversation that we're going to be having today, we'll keep coming back to these two themes. This one theme that cuts across conscious leadership and global solidarity. And that's because conscious leadership means we have to have the awareness of, or to question, not just what can be built, not just what are the big, nice applications we can have, but also who are we building this for and who is benefiting from these innovations and creations. And global solidarity means that we ensure that this technological transformation is lifting all communities, and it's not just a privileged few who already have access to the digital resources. And so with that, I'm really fortunate today to be joined by 4 exceptional voices who approach ethical AI from diverse perspectives. And on top of that, like as a cherry on the top, they also practice it in their lived experiences. And they're going to be sharing that with us today. So we have Eric Mibwari, who is going to be bringing insights from academic research. And he is a postdoctoral researcher in AI and computer science at Harvard, with a background that spans from Stanford to multiple continents. Really excited to have him here with us today. We also have Srija Kaimal, who offers valuable industry perspective, especially from the private sector. And she is a senior director at Capital One and former Alexa AI leader at Amazon. with deep roots in ethical tech design and years of experience in leading AI teams. And she's on a mission to make intelligent systems trustworthy, inclusive, and most importantly, human-centered. We also have John, who is one of the For Youth by Youth family members, and he represents youth-led innovation as an AI and impact intelligence specialist here at Panari for the For Youth by Youth movement, where he's directly involved in curating pathways for young people to shape the technologies that will define their futures. And last but not least, we have Bobina Zofa, who illuminates critical questions of power and justice as a digital rights researcher at Policy, where her work on Afrofeminist data governance challenges us to reimagine what ethical AI could look like when centered on historically marginalized communities. So welcome to our 4 panelists for today. In the next hour or so, we're going to move beyond just surface level discussions of AI ethics and really examine real implementation challenges, explore opportunities for innovation that serve communities, and hopefully by the end of this, we can have concrete actions for what do we do moving forward. And so without further ado, I'm going to invite our first panelist of today, who is Eric. Eric, thank you so much for joining us. To start us off, could you please briefly introduce yourself beyond the brief introduction that I've given? And then maybe you can help us set the stage for today's session. How do you define ethical AI and responsible AI? And secondly, what do you think we often get wrong or overlook when we are talking about these terms, ethical AI? Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you everyone for being here today. I'm happy to be able to contribute to this discussion. And I applaud all the efforts of Panari, the Terrorist Network, in empowering young people to think seriously about these questions. So I am a postdoctoral research fellow in computer science, as Maria said, at Harvard University, where I got my PhD last year as well. And I researched responsible AI and how it intersects with markets. So I started my PhD after working at IBM Research for 5 years. And the work I did at IBM Research laid the foundation for some of my PhD work. I was designing credit scoring algorithms to enable lending over mobile money platforms in East Africa with deployments across West Africa as well. And we wanted to have credit scoring algorithms that accurately predict the likelihood of borrowers to repay their loans in full and on time. So at that point, my focus was on helping the lenders minimize default and therefore increase profitability. But when I came to do my PhD, I started asking questions along the lines of, are these credit scoring models fair across different socioeconomic groups? Right? Are they incorporating enough data to make sure that they're inclusive for old people, for women, for folks who are not necessarily literate, whose data is not prevalent in, or digitized in the banks? So I studied credit scoring as well in my PhD program, but from a fairness angle. Specifically, I was researching how do we enable people who've been previously denied loans or mortgages or health insurance or denied bail in court, be able to change something that is changeable so that in future they can qualify for a positive decision. So the ability to change your outcome is called recourse. It's a legal term. So my research was trying to build recourse into AI models to enable folks improve their behavior, improve their income, become more attractive so that in future when models are rerun, they can potentially get a positive decision where previously they had a negative decision. Then I started looking into the broader intersection with markets, especially when AI agents are used for commercial, economic, financial decisions like price setting. So I looked at e-commerce platforms, think eBay, Alibaba, Amazon, where when you have a lot of sellers on a platform like that who have many, many items, they cannot price these things by hand. They cannot price multiple items by hand because sometimes you have to change the price multiple times per day to respond to your competitors. So what they do is that they deploy AI agents, which, for example, study the behavior of their competitors and then increase the price if the competitor's price increases or decrease it so that you're not losing market share. They also respond to your own cost as a seller. And it's been shown both in experimental studies and in the real world in Germany that these price setting AI agents, without interventions over time, learn to bring the price up for everybody, right? In a way that hurts customers and looks like collusion. So collusion is a legal term, which is very clearly defined when, let's say that, the CEO of Coke and the CEO of Pepsi call each other and say, let's increase the price of a can of soda. And if you're taken to court accused of collusion, they have to show explicit communication between two sellers. However, the difference in the AI case is that there is no explicit communication between the two agents. Therefore, you cannot really sue these agents or the owners of these models for collusion. But the net effect is collusive in the sense that the prices that customers see at the end of the day are very close to what economists call monopoly price, right? Way above what's called equilibrium price. So the models are colluding, the owners or the models themselves cannot be sued. So what do we do? So my research studied number one, how do you detect this kind of collusion? And then number two, what do you do about it? So my research, which I've published in conferences like NeurIPS, was number one, designing a game theoretic framework where I have another agent I introduce in the network, acting on behalf of a regulator so as to protect consumers. How does it do this? It, for example, sets rules and regulations in a flexible way. So you can, for example, think of the case of, Amazon or Alibaba, where you can have actually design decisions, right? Where only the lowest price item is shown prominently on their homepage. And this signal, where demand is steered towards the lowest priced seller, will counteract the other collusive behavior so that then the agents learn that if they lower their prices, they are more likely to be displayed prominently and therefore to steer demand to the best behaving agent. I've extended the same kind of work when AI agents are deployed for electricity markets, especially off-grid power, where power producers have to store power in batteries, and but they want to optimize their battery storage. What is the optimization? You want to charge your batteries or buy power from the grid when the price per unit is low, and you want to sell when the price per unit is high if you're selling extra power to the grid. Now, what happens when AI agents are allowed to do this optimization? They learn to collude again, like OPEC. You know OPEC? OPEC is the oil producing set of countries. Sometimes they flood the market with petrol to lower prices. Sometimes they withdraw power to increase prices. So AI agents that are deployed to do battery optimization learn this behavior as well, right? So my research, number one, detects this behavior and then introduces rules on behalf of a regulator. For example, we can cap how much agents are allowed to trade per hour, right? Whether it's like a low threshold or a high threshold, and therefore minimize the opportunities for arbitrage. That's my academic research. But the reason I'm really interested in using some of that background for the work that this network is doing is because I think a lot of places in the world are not yet thinking critically about the potential negative effects of unethical AI use. And just to quickly summarize the question that Maria posed to me, the differences between ethical AI and responsible AI, the ethical, at the end of the day, all these terms have the same general idea, which is do good, avoid evil, right? Increase benefits to humans, reduce harms. However, ethical AI's focus is on human values, human principles, human morals, like, let's say, justice, no discrimination, no bias, inclusivity, right? So ethical AI lens kind of doesn't care how we achieve it as long as we achieve those things, right? As long as there's no bias, there's justice, there's no discrimination. So a lot of ethical AI work, for example, looks at fairness. are credit scoring models fair for women versus men, right? Old versus young, right? Responsible AI, on the other hand, answers the question, what can we practically do, right, as developers, as engineers, as designers of models to make sure that our AI, number one, can be governed, can be controlled, can be audited. Why? To achieve the ethical AI objectives, right? So responsible AI is a more practical, sort of like action-oriented, lens to think about, the ethical AI objectives. So, and then to conclude, there's other terms that are thrown out there, for example, safe AI, which is a big focus now, but safe AI is a part of responsible AI, because responsible AI, again, I said, is trustworthy, it's auditable, it's governable, and safe AI is just one part of responsible AI. I'll shut up right now to give everyone else a chance to speak, and maybe we can revisit this discussion later.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I think you've given us a lot to think about. I even saw someone in the chat say this is so interesting because I think in today's world, when you hear AI, everybody just jumps to it's probably ChatGPT, it's probably prompt engineering, but you've opened up a whole worm of what AI really looks like, even when we, the consumers, don't know about it, whether in shopping, like you said, in banks and credit scores, even in the amount we are paying for power and fuel. So thank you for opening it up and then also contextually talking about what is ethical AI and what is responsible AI. So thank you so much. Srija, I'll jump into you now. And thank you too for joining us today. Could you please briefly introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about the work that you do, and then also from an industry perspective, you can let us know how do you define AI from the lens of the work that you're currently doing, and what do you think are very critical ethical considerations that companies should prioritize when developing these AI technologies? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for the question. And thank you so much. It's great to be here. And before just introducing, like, what an amazing panel, right? Like, so I feel very humbled to be sharing this platform across such diverse panelists over here. And I'm more excited to actually learn and all the key takeaways that I could take back from this panel discussion. So first and foremost, heartfelt gratitude to Tufts, Panari, Phil, Maria, and everyone involved for giving me this platform and for enabling me to share this platform with the panelists here. So thank you, everybody, and very excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation. As Maria mentioned, I'm a senior director for the technical program management function at Capital One, leading privacy and external data sharing programs with a focus on open banking and responsible innovation. My work, by that, what I mean is my work predominantly ensures that the data use aligns with regulatory frameworks and customer trust expectations while supporting the development of large, scalable AI-driven systems. So to answer to the second, that was my quick introduction. And as Maria mentioned, I've worked with Alexa at Amazon, and when I joined Alexa, like I consider her as my third child. She was only 1.5 years old, and from the very rudimentary feature of like how do we search for recipes, how do we add things to items, I was one of the I was lucky enough to be one of those team members to be involved end to end in deploying AI systems that enable you to do you to interact with Alexa. A lot of learnings from there, and I'm looking forward to share some of those experiences as we go by. To address Maria's question on, to me, what does ethical AI mean, right? From my perspective, ethical AI means designing and developing AI systems that uphold human dignity, fairness, transparency, and accountability at every step. It's just not about avoiding harm. It's about proactively ensuring that AI serves the community equitably. So, and to the third part of your question, Maria, about like, what are the ethical considerations, right? So to me, my ethical consideration or my guiding principles when I build AI system is summarized into 4 main principles. One is bias mitigation, like ensuring I have diverse and inclusive training data and design to prevent any type of discriminatory outcomes, right? Second, transparency, like making AI decisions explainable and understandable humanly, especially when they impact people's lives. Then third piece is consent and data privacy, respecting users' right over their data with clear boundaries on collection and use. So at any point, as a customer, I need to know, to Eric's point, right? How is my data being used? Do you have my consent of my data? What am I consenting for you to use from me, right? So that's my right. And, respecting that is a key critical pillar of ethical AI. And finally, accountability. To, again, going back to what John mentioned, right? There are governance structures for when two humans from different companies talk to each other to come together to monopolize the pricing structure. But when technology talks, there is no governance, right? So having a clear governance structure, so someone, right, is responsible at the end of the day for the AI outcomes and remediation. So those are the four main guiding principles that I look towards to when I build AI systems. So, just to summarize, ultimately for me, ethical AI isn't a checklist. It's a mindset embedded in company culture, product development, and long term strategy.
Thank you so much, Sisha. I think one of the key things that I'm taking away from what you're saying is we are not just involved in the end, it's from the beginning, from when the data is being trained to when the data is being used and how it's being used and whether consent was given. And even once it's deployed, in who's keeping this accountable. So thank you so much. Very, very practical tips and tricks that are coming in. Also very cool that you are working on Alexa. Yeah, as a fellow techie, that's like, woo. But yeah, thank you so much. On to John. Welcome to our panel. I think we know John a little bit from the For Youth by Youth movement, but John, maybe you can tell us a little bit about who you are outside of the For Youth by Youth movement, a little bit about your background, but then also given your experience within the policy space, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what do you see are some of the very important policy frameworks and governance structures that are needed to ensure that AI development is benefiting society as a whole from a policy lens? Welcome, John.
Hi guys. I'm super honored to be here. As I think I'm the least experienced here, but I will try my best to share my experience. Yeah, I totally agree. First of all, with the aforementioned ideas, very impressive. My name is John. I'm an NGL alumni, and I am working currently as an AI and impact intelligence specialist. Looks very cool name for the position that we have. But basically, what we are trying to do here with Panari and For Use by Use movement is getting most out of AI and based on ethics, of course. We are trying effectively use AI. We are exploring how we can get predictive insights of our learnings. We are trying to collect a lot of data. I'm kind of every time asking you guys to fill out the survey at the end of the session, and I will do that thing today too. That will help us to build a better webinar session, better learning experience along the way during the program. And we also, as you noticed, we have a special ethical AI working group, which is a separate working group. And the subjects during that working group will focus on this topic and explore the ways how young leaders effectively use this technology in their communities and be aware of its shortcomings. It's very important that to know, as speakers before me spoke about it, AI has a lot of shortcomings, and young people need to be aware of in order to effectively use it. and we are looking forward to seeing what ideas the Ethical AI Working Group will present in the International Youth Conference in November in Turkey. That will be very interesting. And it's important to mention that these questions and solutions are use-driven and use-led. And it's not a top-down approach, but it's more like grassroots. So talking about my experience with the policies, I don't have a PhD yet, but I did my master's in international public affairs and wrote my thesis on AI and social welfare distribution. There, my interest kind of arose into the fairness and transparency of technologies that we are using and the policies that are in place. What worries me is that we have the technology already, but we have lack of policies in place and lack of experts in the public sphere. So, for instance, if you take the modern and more or less good AI policies in the place is the EU AI Act that was recently accepted. That's also very new and still being challenged. It has a lot of shortcomings and it's risk-based. It misses out a lot of stuff. There are also sector-based, let's say we have a sector-based AI policies in finance, healthcare, and including the facts that aforementioned, AI should be in place before the collection of any data. It should be transparent, prioritize privacy, fairness, human oversight. As you might have seen recently, those who use ChatGPT, it sometimes starts hallucinating. Then I think we should have a sort of a kill switch at some point because they do hallucinate, and we should be very aware of these kind of shortcomings. That's why I'm here. And I totally agree with Srija's point that AI should be very simply explained for every human, especially when you open terms of conditions. You have like 10 pages of legal document that nobody understands. We should make that easier. And that's what I'm trying to do. And probably I will do my PhD on that direction. Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I think all of us will be waiting for simpler terms and conditions because, to be honest, I think if you went around the room and asked everyone, what have you signed off on all of these platforms? Where's your data going and how can they use it? I doubt anyone could really explain. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for also laying the ground that yes, the For Youth by Youth movement will be doing a lot of work within ethical AI. So I will now tell you guys, you should follow our social media platforms so you can see the incredible work John will be doing over the course of the year. But yeah, thank you so much for bringing us the policy perspective. And also, I think you bring up a very critical cat and mouse chase that tends to happen when innovation is running very fast and policy is always trying to keep up. So who's bridging that gap? And it's very important. So thank you so much. And last but not least, we're gonna hear from Bobina. Bobina, thank you so much for being here. Please introduce a little bit more about yourself, and you can share a little bit about the work that you do at Policy. And then one of the leading questions I have for you is from your perspective, especially seeing as you do a lot of work with data rights in Africa, how do you see ethical AI being implemented? And what do you think is often being overlooked when we are discussing AI's impact, especially on our community, on our grassroots level on the continent? Yeah, welcome, Bobina.
Thank you very much. And like everyone has said, it's a big pleasure and honor as well for me to be a part of this conversation. Like Maria said, I'm called Bobina Zulfa, and I work as a data and digital rights researcher with Policy. Policy is a Pan-African feminist civ tech. We work across the African continent, looking at issues across the data digital rights landscape. Much of my work personally is around tech policy and data governance. So for this conversation particularly, I think for me it's very interesting, and also, and I think, some of the earlier speakers hinted to how we've seen this evolution of the conversation around ethics to over the years to where we are today. And I think for me, I'll start from there, sharing just my experiences of this work. About 3 years ago, we did this research at Policy, trying to understand governance, how governance was being thought around. And because I think to start from just how we define ethical AI for starters and to where we are today, I think there is from the ethics washing and even bashing that has been happening over the years, there is this notion that ethics is sort of this endless philosophical inquiry, which is not true, because the idea of ethical AI, I think, has been very helpful in giving us these intrinsic values within, or on top of which we're able to do an evaluation of the so many competing tech policy strategies, or so many outcomes that come out of this broad spectrum of there's so many issues we're hearing responsible tech, we're hearing there's so many issues of ethics to do with responsibility and accountability and fairness and transparency. So how do you balance all of these issues? So I think from the governance perspectives that we've been thinking around in supporting is, how do we get to balance all of these issues? And I think ethical AI is very, very useful in helping to sort of do a prioritization in terms of what should come first. Is it people coming first, or is it capital that is going to be placed ahead of societies and communities' well-being? So I think that has been the bulk of our work at Policy, in just trying to in this scope where there is so many priorities and so many things to be attended to say, hey, as government, for instance, you're saying that as we're adopting AI systems and we're integrating them in our operations, you're saying it's for efficiency, it's for modernization. With industry, we hear a lot of language around risk mitigation or compliance, but at what point do we talk about how people are involved in the decision making? So I think John talked about, for instance, the EU AI Act, but on the continent here in Africa as well, I'll speak for the context here of Africa, we have the continental AI strategy that was passed last year. And I think that's something that, it's a big milestone, right? That the continent has thought about how to, how are we envisioning integration of AI systems from a policy perspective? How can policy guide our thinking? That again, there is the question of how are people involved, right? Social participation, how are people brought in questioning? So again, bring it closer to us here is you find that a lot of the way AI adoption and development is thought about is very much from the perspective of the developmentalist perspective, right? It is to enable development. And rightfully so, right? If you're still grappling with a lot of very, basic social services around health and education and, climate change and whatnot, of course, it is okay to look to AI to see how it can help us in addressing these very fundamental problems of our societies. But if you're looking at the problems from this techno-solutionist perspective, right, people are not brought to the center to be a part of envisioning how can we integrate these systems. For instance, if I'm a farmer, how could I integrate these systems in a way that is that actually serves me and maybe my community, if we're a community of service. So I think for us the bigger conversation has been around participation of people in the governance process, but also broadly within adoption and development. And then in that participation, bringing in the question of power, right? Who holds power over it? So for instance, we've been talking about the consent example has come up very strongly here. We know a lot of consumer tech here on the continent, for instance, where people are using AI systems is across consumer tech with, for instance, social media. Of course, this is besides government, where we have, the facial recognition technologies in the name of national security, etc. There's a whole other conversation there again as well in terms of talking, to the question of power, right? How, who holds power over who, and, how is this power ideally? So to the so many, issues that we see coming along the questions of, power imbalances and the asymmetries of who holds power over who, I think for us is one of the biggest questions. And I think I should also, mention that very interestingly, I think I've been doing this work just a little over 3 years, maybe close to 4 years. And, we found the sentiment, particularly here in Africa, and I think it's very useful to ground ourselves in the context, for the work that we're doing, that we're still a region that is still grappling with, very fundamental, like connectivity problems, right? We still have a connectivity divide, and very much a digital divide as well. So if you have a digital divide, it almost seems like you're making haste to talk about rights of people around technologies and etc., because we should ideally be looking to, these technologies coming to our societies as a great thing. But we understand that that is not necessarily what is happening. We see a lot of issues around data and the ethics around data, how data is being extracted on the continent. We see issues to do with data colonialism, and that's a whole big problem with, big tech. If there is a lot of data that is being taken out of the continent through people engaging on these platforms, but there is so little value to be seen for that data, there's a conversation to be had through the ethics, framework. I talked about the techno-solutionism, right? That any systems that are brought to your societies should be celebrated as progress, even when they're not, even when they're fundamentally, harmful, right? So we see, for instance, with the facial recognition technologies that we see that, are actually, really mass surveillance systems, but that are just put across in the name of, national security. But the boundaries of that national security is not very much delineated. So I think, from the work that we've been doing for us is to address those issues along the lines of social impact, how these technologies, as they're being adopted and developed here on the continent, being speaking to people's actually realities and needs, that they're actually addressing problems that people want to be addressed, right? Someone, I think many of the speakers earlier spoke to the issues of language. We speak about languages. We know that, with a lot of the systems that are being adopted on the continent. Again, I'll give the example of the systems on, for instance, social media platforms, the recommendation algorithms, that language is still a very fundamental problem, and that, we see continuities of the prejudices, the biases of, if you have so many people that fundamentally are disconnected from, this world of English and whatnot, how are they supposed to ideally benefit from these systems? There's issues to do with the economics, platform economics and labor work. We see a lot of issues to do with, this, future of work, this platform labor, and how we're seeing remuneration and so many other issues around, we've seen a lot of the exposés that have come up over the years of, where we hear our governments talk about, oh, now more young people are a part of the AI, ecosystem in Africa. But what kind of work are they doing? We saw in Kenya, for instance, you have so many young people that are doing the work of data labeling. So dignified work, decent work, those are conversations again to be had along the lines of ethical AI. So very briefly, I'd say that is, the scope of the way we've been looking at these problems, how the technology and the human, and how is this happening? Is it happening for the benefit of certain people, or is it actually, certain people sort of living more on the edge of risks as opposed to, the benefits, and that the benefits are being accrued to, these big corporations and maybe government, or, some big players in the broader AI ecosystem. I'll stop there. Thank you, and so happy to learn from you.
I think you've wrapped up our introductory phase very well, and you've brought up very pertinent questions. But I think one thing I'm very appreciative of that you brought out is that you four who are in the industry are speaking on behalf of all of us. And that gives me, and I think it gives everyone here, a lot of hope that there's people within the spaces who are actually actively advocating on behalf of the rights and the voices of all of us. And that gives us a lot of hope, a lot of joy. So thank you very much. So now our next round of questions are gonna be fireside. So I'm going to be giving our panelists like 1.5 minutes max so that we can also get into a more interactive Q&A. I don't want to take too much time out of our audience's time to also pick your brains on a couple of things. So Eric, in a few very impactful words, John introduced some of the work that is going to be happening within the For Youth by Youth movement, where we're going to be having young people who are coming to build projects, within the AI space. And so if you are going to be giving them a bit of advice when it comes to like what kind of projects they should be exploring within the AI space, what should they use, what should they build, and what sort of frameworks should they go into before they actually start the technology? What sort of like pieces of advice would you give them? Yeah.
Thank you, Maria. So I'll try and be quick. The first thing is question the hype. There's a lot of hype in the world right now, and the hype is driven primarily by selfish interest of corporations that want to drive up their valuations by agitating for bigger, larger models. Therefore, let's get money to buy GPUs and build data centers. So there's a lot of hype. Question the hype, right? When people say they're able to do something with AI, really do question it. Is that true, right? So have a very critical reading of the news, of the media about claims that are made about AI. And then more practically, as you work on your projects in your ethical AI working group, think about contributing data from your communities, right? Both for existing models and for the models you create yourselves, right? And when I say data from your communities, I mean, for example, agricultural data for crops that are only found in your region or your country, right? Health issues that are prevalent in your communities as opposed to data that has been collected in other areas. That's number one. Number two, relatedly, is get your languages represented, right? And this is tied to the first point, but it's slightly different, right? So you can have data from your local area represented in English, right? But it's also important to get your own languages represented because I think, as someone mentioned earlier on, I think actually it's Maria when she set us up with the first question, right? Like, how do you say artificial intelligence in your language? And if the majority of folks in the world that we live in cannot describe what it is in their own language, is it really having a positive impact in them? So get your data or work on projects where local languages are represented. And I know, for example, in Africa, it's a challenge. It's 3,000 of them, right? Start with some major ones, right? And number three, again, as I said, it's question the hype, question the claims. There's a case in Kenya recently where this company came in and was, collecting digital iris fingerprint data, and I think, they were told to stop doing it. I think some biased folks are saying, okay, there's no case, but they were actually, I think it's called WorldCoin, right? So always question claims and then get your voice heard, criticize, right? On X, on LinkedIn, in your communities, talk about it, right? So there's widespread awareness. I have to tell this network that one of my biggest sources of learning about ethics is listening to voices like Joy Bolamwini, right? And Timnit Gebru. So I'd recommended that folks in this audience look at a documentary by Joy Bolamwini. It's called Coded Bias. If you've not seen it, please go see it. It's on Netflix, and we'll put a lot of our discussions today in perspectives. So talk about things, post about them, and then in as much as you can help audit models, right? And when I say audit models, it can be structured or unstructured, right? If you're using an application, right, note what the failures are, note the hallucinations, post about them, right? I'll stop there for now, but just in summary, contribute data, get your languages represented, question claims, question the hype, help audit models, talk about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Srija, that leads to you. So how do we balance innovation and responsibility when building AI tools for community? How do we, because I know the question has come up, what comes first? How are we doing it together? So practically speaking, how do we do this? Yeah.
So, everything is my perspective, right? And I'm a people person. So for me, it's always people first and everything else follows, right? So to me, innovation without responsibility is actually exploitation, right? To truly serve the community, we need participation from the community. We need to build a design that is participatory, right? We are not just building a solution or a feature for the users, but we need to bring the community through that journey from from the time of like framing the problem statement to testing the solution, then and to like the long-term safety and equity, right? Because we are talking about AI systems. So whatever we develop, at the end of the day, it's impacting people. So our community need to know what we are building, and they need to understand the long-term strategy of like their safety and their equity into these systems, right? So I want to talk about a recent or a real world problem, right? So recently or some time back in the US, there was a rollout of like facial recognition technologies in the public school systems in part of US. They rolled out these technology as a part of improving safety by automating surveillance. But many research, including the one that was done in the MIT Media Lab, found out that these technology oftentimes misidentified students of color at disproportionately higher rates, right? So worse, students and parents were never consulted for such a technology development and its rollout, right? So what really happened here? So technology moved fast, but responsibility lagged behind, right? So if this was being built for the safety of school community, especially the students and the parents, right? They should have been informed, involved from the beginning. So they could have raised some red flags about data privacy, bias mitigation, or racial bias that's showed up, right? And the psychological safety. But in this case, harm was done, and then, under the flag of like safety or tech progress, right? So my my you know my summarized takeaway for the youth over here is like, when you're building AI for a community, don't just ask, like to Eric's point, right? Can this be built? So, like Eric mentioned, you need to question the hype. The question, do we need this? Who are we solving this for? And what real problems are we solving, right? So, understanding the community, understanding the problem, and then also asking a very important question: is this going to be harming like a group of community, even unintentionally, right? Like, are we going to harm a small group? So I think there is this framework that we can use. It's the community review board, right? Like every time we think of a solution, iteratively bring our solution back to the community, get a review. To John's point, right? Like data is important. Like how we use data is the question, right? But to John's point, bring the community, collect data on like, are we on the right track? Then every often review the solution, bring our community into testing the solution that you're building. So I think this is one way to imbibe a responsibility into when you're building AI.
Thank you so much. Lots of nuggets of wisdom there. And over to you, John. What is exciting you the most about AI right now? And what is giving you pause? I think what's giving you pause, you might have touched on it in your previous answer. What's exciting you and what's giving you pause?
Yeah, a lot of stuff excites me. I mean, first time when I remember when ChatGPT came out, I was like, wow, this is super cool. But then a lot of things started pausing me. For instance, what excites me is AI, especially this kind of AI tools, democratizing access to the knowledge. And for instance, if you are a really good prompt engineer, what I'm trying to do is, yesterday, I was asking ChatGPT, hey, ChatGPT, can you personalize the syllabus for me for this class, professional development? And then I take that answer and then I go to another AI, let's say DeepSeek or like any other AI agent. Hey, AI agent, ChatGPT gave me this response. Are you better than this? Can you bring more results? And then they try to compete among each other. So I'm getting, by doing this, I'm getting better responses from different AI agents and using it in my own use. daily use. And what gives me, what pauses me is that the disruption in job market because of AI, a lot of people for the past couple of years, a lot of people got laid off. And then what I have been also victim of, if you apply for certain position in big corporations, they're using AI to screen the applicants, which I hated with my heart. So you get decided by the AI. And then the thirdly is AI race, especially in the military sector, using unmanned drones that are deciding what to target or what not, which is inhumane. That's for now what excites me on one hand and what pauses me on the other.
Thank you, John. Over to you, Bobina. I think you mentioned a lot of questions that, especially here on the African continent, we need to be asking. I do have a question though. How can African nations not only benefit, because I think, like you rightfully said, this is not it's not an innovation that we're about to switch off tomorrow. So it's here to stay. So how can we benefit from AI technologies while at the same time proactively mitigating the potential harms? Yeah.
That's a really good question, but also one that I think my fellow speakers have sort of already touched on. I think it's really towing that line, of careful innovation in the sense that we understand what the risks are and we understand what the communities whom we are developing for are, their needs, their realities, and then we develop, in line with, addressing the need as opposed to developing for developing sake or, adoption for just adoption's sake. So I think there is just so much potential. We've been hearing about some of the things that are happening on the continent. There are, people who have decided to come in and address, for instance, the language issue, being absent from the digital realm, and they're saying, oh, we're going to come and create our own data sets or, come up with our own natural language processors, things like that, to be able to address gaps. I think there is a bit of, that proactivity to say, hey, there is a gap here, and how do we come in to address it? Of course, there is constraints around, things like funding, because it's a very expensive endeavor to be able to put together the data sets that are needed to build these systems, as broadly as they need to be. So it's, I think, addressing also those challenges that stand in the line of addressing some of the issues that we already know are existent on the continent. But I think maybe, because I think a lot of the issues have a lot of the things that I wanted to speak to have already been spoken about, right? With careful, or this this idea to innovate in a way that tends to the needs of people, where, we spoke about issues earlier of accountability, where there is risk or where there is harm, who do we get to hold accountable? I think there's a lot of conversations around trying to hold platforms accountable, but we also understand that, for instance, in our context, if I think there is this, I don't know if some of you here have seen it, this interesting comparison where they show, oh, this is the GDPs of, for instance, the East African community as a whole, and this is how much Amazon as a company, amassed just in 1 year. And so where there is, those power symmetries of these corporations hold so much power, wield so much power, how we're able to address that? I think then there's also a conversation to be had as to how we can meaningfully contribute to the global digital conversations, to be an actor that actually influences things, to policies, to be able to actually serve the communities. Otherwise, we keep speaking in sort of this endless rut, which sort of goes nowhere. Because if things from the global digital, so you have the OECD has designed these ethical AI principles, and how they adopted on the continent here. How does that take shape if big tech is coming to tell our governments exactly what to do in terms of influencing what are the policy priorities, etc. So I think it's also mitigating those power and influence conversations. And I think those conversations are really to be had more so outside the conversations of technical development themselves. They're geopolitical conversations. They're conversations that our leaders, and I think the conversation here has been about conscious leadership. They have to understand that there's a whole new world. We've been talking about a multipolar world, unipolar world, but there is a whole digital polar world right now, where we have these tech lords who are sort of, driving the global agenda politically, economically, and that, to be able to safeguard our interests as well in terms of, we want AI to come and serve these interests for the continent, that we have to see how to address those issues from the global, digital policy landscape. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think to our audience, I want to let you know that you can start preparing your questions. So you can put your questions in the chat, and in about 7 minutes or so, I can start addressing them. I'll just do a quick last round of follow-up questions to the panelists. And then in case you also would like to come on, you will be given an opportunity to unmute yourself. Just make sure you are in a quiet background so we can hear you clearly. That will happen in about 7 minutes. But yes, if you have questions, you can start putting them in the chat. So just a quick follow-up question to you all. Eric, first and foremost, to the work that you've done. So when you started, you gave us quite a broad perspective on the different industries and different applications of ethical AI that you've been involved in. I do have a question as to how receptive are these corporate players when it comes to implementing these ethical and more responsible frameworks that you've introduced. I think you even mentioned sort of the introduction of a counter agent within like the payments and the price settings, for example. So how responsible are players in the market to adopting these ethical frameworks? Yeah.
Thank you, Maria. That's a very good question. I mean, living in the US now, actually, it's a little bit discouraging because we've seen a shift in tone by companies that previously claimed to be doing ethical and responsible AI work, now de-emphasizing that because of the political environment. Companies that say do no evil are actually dropping slogans and mottos like that. Companies that form ethical AI groups disbanding and firing people that question their practices. So there is resistance, right, by some organizations, right? And these are some of the companies that Bobina was alluding to as, tech lords that are also trying to shape, the policies of countries in the global south. So we need to be really careful and as youth leaders, conscious leaders, be a voice against this movement. But at the same time, what some of my research was trying to do was to show that that mindset, that short-term mindedness, eventually is harmful to a lot of corporations long term, right? So let me give an example in the case of lending, right? If you give a wider distribution of the population a chance to borrow and repay, you're more likely to discover potentially good borrowers, right, over time that increase your long-term profitability as a lender than if you use a biased model at the very beginning that locks out some populations, right? And then you're stuck with a small subset of historical data that was captured in the past, and you miss an opportunity. So part of my research was trying to show to corporations and to companies that it's actually in your benefit most times if you do the ethical, responsible thing, right? So in as much as we can, straddle this competing tensions, this middle ground, and demonstrate to companies that there's actually value in adopting ethical AI principles for your long-term benefit. If you're short-term minded, right, then that's when you see some of the pushback that we're seeing right now. Yeah, and I mean, a lot has been said, but there is discouragement. But luckily for those of us in the global south, we still have a chance before we have oligarchies, decide elections, right? So we still have a chance in the global south to actually shape our, AI journey to, for example, embed uh, African values like Ubuntu, which is, communal, I am because we are, or right, as opposed to individualism, right? Social, people focus as opposed to capitalist corporation focus, as Bobina said, right? Principles that, for example, are youth driven versus, so youth driven, for example, means emphasis on creation of jobs that are dignified, right? As opposed to job elimination. I think John brought up this point, right? Because there's an ethical, there's some folks who focus on AI to do robotics for job elimination, right? What if we flip the mindset where in the global south, there's growing population of young people and we focus on job creation instead, right? And then finally, I'll just conclude by bringing up the point that if we design for difficult environments, for example, we mentioned a low-level infrastructure and connectivity. I think Babina brought up this point, electricity access, edge computing, where you don't have constant connection to the network or to electricity. Solutions that work for the most difficult places and context usually end up working well for everybody, right? Because if it's designed for low power, then it's definitely going to work for prevalent high power. If it's designed for illiterate populations, then it definitely will work for literate populations. So we actually have a chance in the global south to create innovations that work well for the entire world because we're designing for a difficult context. I'll just shut up there for now, but thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Srija, maybe in a minute or so, based on your observation and your work experience as well, how can women of color better navigate the AI industry? Of course, there's been strides and efforts being made, but what strategies have you seen that are really working effectively?
Before I actually go into that question, I just wanted to address what Eric mentioned. Eric, plus one, right, to the study that you said, right, about democratizing loans. So I briefly worked in a small company. Their entire business model was to provide machine learning models to banks to democratize loans and credit offering to the part of community that do not have access, because most banks actually look into very traditional rates that in the US, for context, it's your credit score, it's a few other very traditional parameters that they look into to say whether how much credit, like in a credit card, right? How much credit should we offer you? Do you qualify for this loan? How much for the loan, right? But this company actually looked at like the payday loans, like people who just need $500 or $200 to get to their next payday. And they did this research and they identified this cohort of community is the most diligent community that actually pays back loan. So in a way, if you democratize this, the company is actually acquiring more customers and more long-term customers that as they build their self, right? They could be students. They're like, they're building themselves up. They are long-term customers, and in that journey, the company is acquiring like a long-term customers for a long time. So plus one to what Eric mentioned, that is a great point, right? There are a few things that Eric that you mentioned that ringed really well, and I have like some real life experience in the corporate, but I think I don't have time to explain all of those. But so I'll go to Maria's question. Women of color and AI and in tech and in corporate is like a decade old problem, and we continue to fight that rigorously. I do have to say, just to set background, right? Back in 2011, when I was in my master's, my first job in the US, I was one woman. Forget about women in color, just one woman in doing engineering, like hands-on coding among like 40 men in my like the small team that we had, right? And it continued for a very, very long time. And I had my second child. And then I realized, I think this is the youth group, but at the time, there was only 12 weeks of maternity. Sorry, 10 weeks of maternity. So after 10 weeks, I'm back at work. And, I'm still nursing my kid. And so I had to, pump milk and all that stuff. So half the time I am worn down thinking that the company is paying me, but I'm spending all my time pumping milk for my kid, right? So from there, I started like, I am pretty sure this is not me alone. There should be other women, even if it is only 5 people in the company. And together with like a young woman who's not married, who did not have kids, we co-founded a Women in Technology resource group in our company at the time. It was one of many in one of the earliest group in Boston, and during that time we used to consult different companies around the Boston, Massachusetts area to say, how do you start a resource group, right? From there to now, we have made a huge stride. I'm saying improvement, like there is growth, there is improvement, there is light at the end of the tunnel. But going to addressing Maria's question, to the point, right? So over my 18 years in the industry, what I've learned, by the way, also to set stage, in India, in my home, I am the first engineer in my home. In my little world, right? I'm the first woman engineer. And everybody wondered why I chose engineering and something not, because it was not, as a woman, that was not a befitting role, because it was a role of men, right? So from there, I learned as a woman of color in AI, tech leadership, as an engineer, as a person starting off, it's not about fitting in. It's about standing firm about your values, your ethics, what you truly believe in. So it's not about fitting in. So don't feel the need to fit in. You're fine. You should be unique, right? Second, document everything. I've learned that when I document, I can think clearly, right, about your wins, about your losses, about your challenges. And when you reflect, you are able to refine yourself. So write a lot. And it's also not about, writing is not about uh, fighting back, right? It's also a form of your voice, and it deserves a record. So hold it, keep a record. And it also gives you mental peace, by the way. Thirdly, speak up, right? This doesn't mean that your voice has to be loud. It's about asking difficult questions. It's about gently pointing out like gaps. It's about gently saying, hey, when you are developing this product, have you thought about women of color? When you are building this product, have you thought about mothers? When you're building this product, have you thought about an X community, right? So you are diverse, own it, ask difficult questions. When you see that people who are building features doesn't look like you, then ask, does this feature or does this product fit me? Right? So don't hesitate asking those questions. It's not about being loud, it's about asking key questions. Um, and when I've worked in AI for a long time in enterprises, in different corporates, and I've seen that oftentimes strongest ideas that do not fit into the mold is often shut down. So when the corporate and the enterprise or where you're working doesn't give you a mic, you start your own revolution. To what Eric was saying, right? You as youth, you find your voice. Maybe start a podcast, right? That's the as much as we talk about like all the evils that we have now, the good thing is also these platforms are great platforms. If you use it wisely, these are great platforms that you can use it to your benefit, right? Start a podcast, start a YouTube channel, let your voice be heard, right? So that's when others don't give you a microphone, others don't give you a platform, create your own avenues, and you have the skills and you have the technology for it. And finally, I want to say you need to protect your peace. Boundary setting is not about just self care, it's a strategy. You can't build ethical AI or anything for that matter if you don't have a peaceful environment, if your ethics is not protected, if your environment doesn't protect your values, you need to do that. And I think I keep repeating this in all the talks, and I missed to tell you all about that, which is peer networking, right? You need to have your board of directors. Your board of directors will become your voice, your safety net, your strategist who's going to look around the corners where you can, be vulnerable, and they will help you. So by peer networking is identifying your coaches, mentors, and that can go a long way.
Thank
That is
you.
my final, Maria. I have one more point. Sorry, I need to mention this. This might be a little diverse.
Yeah.
As being here, as I build my Women in Technology, network, I know it is an important topic, and it is an important topic that we need to invest in. But we also need to identify like our male counterparts. A lot of the issues that like as women of color, but as men of any color, right? Some of these challenges they also face. So it'll be good to build partnership with them to actually help each other win together. So don't consider. I don't want to create this blanket statement that men are not supporting. I want to say that we need to educate them, and some of these things that we face, they also face, right, in the corporate world, especially. And how do we partner, right? How do we educate, partner, and build ourselves together? So I know it's not a very common term, but I live by it. I feel like everyone are humans and everyone can be good partners.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
Maria.
so much. So I want us to open up. If anyone in the room has a question, now is the time to raise your hand, and then we can give you the platform to ask a question. I did see a question come in the chat. So as we're waiting for a hand to come up, maybe John, you can take this question. And if I can just scroll. So it was in relation to what you said about the AI hiring process. So might the use of AI in hiring practice increase employment disparities and inequities? John, maybe you can give us your thought on that question.
Yeah, I think the employee, that's the one of the things that came across. So even in the policy, there was a case in Netherlands when they used the AI system to distribute social welfare, and then the AI system started discriminating poor and low-income families, along with the families with their last name starting not European, but like, let's say, Middle Eastern. And then the government started resigning, and then they were fined for 500 million euros. So that sort of stuff is also happening. Let's say if you have a non-white sounding or like a name, when you apply for big corporations, then there's a likelihood that AI might discriminate against you. That will eliminate, of course, the bright voices coming from the global south. On that regard, I would say this. So in order to avoid that, be critical of it, and then before applying, maybe like ask the hiring process, so that not so many companies, they laid out their hiring process. And then you can get that info and you have a right for it.
Thank you, John. Srita, you have your hand up.
Yes, so I wanted to say whatever John mentioned and the question asked is a real world problem and irrelevant to the youth here, right? The graduates, they are going to probably start applying for jobs, and this is going to be seen. I think I'm going to go back to what Eric mentioned, right? A lot of problems are big problems. Some of them we may not be able to solve like at that level, right? So now we have to be creative in saying what is the small problem solving we have to do, right? That's where LinkedIn, your professional network, right, the people that you meet over here becomes epitome to say, hey, I've seen this opportunity, can you refer me here? So problem solving, considering that there is this issue is existing, we need to work towards like removing this bias. But how do I make strides, right? How can I be successful even even having all these constraints around? We can't solve all the issues to make our success strides, right? So I just wanted to call that out.
Thank you so much. In case anyone would like to come on and speak, please feel free to unmute raise your hand, and we can give you a chance to come forward. Maybe Bobina, my final question to you is, what's one piece of work that you've done at Policy that you're really proud of that you can share with us today? It can be like a team effort, individual, but yeah, something you're proud of.
Yeah, I was going to ask if it's like my personal work or that I'm proud of. Okay, relevant to this discussion. We okay, we're in between right now. It's not yet something that's that's live yet, but we're in between putting together this lexicon for hate speech because we realize that's something that's a problem with the bots online and whatnot, and so we thought it would be useful to put together a lexicon that could help with identifying some of these, especially when it comes to the other end of trying to be on the defense for online hate speech. Because anyways, we're done with the issues around tech facilitated gender-based violence or broadly online violence and how people can keep themselves safe online. I think it's something that's very useful. Other than that, I would say like I'd interest most people on this call to go and buy Policy's website. We've done, I think, a bunch of research on a lot of the issues that we're speaking about here, and it would be very helpful to understand them from the African context, that we document what is happening on the continent here and across a bunch of communities, especially marginalized communities, minority communities, across so many different experiences. So I'd say it's very useful, very resourceful, rather, to if you went by the website to find a lot of the research on there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, I think one of us will put the link in the chat for everyone to go and check out after this. So as we wrap up, I think I'll give each of our panelists just 30 seconds to give us their closing remarks as we are about to close. So Eric, we can start with you.
Thank you, Maria. I was hoping more of the audience would participate and maybe ask questions live. I can see Kirabo Joel has a hand. Maybe we can hear from them.
Yes, Joel, feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Grateful to the panelists. So my question is concerning the ethics of AI in terms of cost, because when Madam was presenting, she was talking about developing AI with a consideration that, let's say, you're developing for India, you're developing for Africa. So my question comes into because much as people who are developing AI should be considerate of Africa, but Africa as well should be able to develop its own AI. So what are some solutions that that you've seen or that you're working on concerning the cost that comes with developing artificial intelligence? Because training these modules we know is expensive and we don't have the infrastructure here. So that's the whole background of the conversation I wish you could also have at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, good question, Kirabo. Let me try and just offer perspectives on some initial thoughts. So I think this is where policy makers really have to try and bring solutions. When I say policy makers, I mean governments. And our governments have, especially like, in the global south, including Africa, there is budget constraints, there's limitations. So really careful use of resources. So part of the reason I was saying we should be careful about the hype is that there's a risk that governments are listening to hype from the global tech leaders could invest limited resources unwisely. Let me give an example. An example is building really sophisticated data centers with GPUs, 1 gigawatt center GPUs, because that's what people are doing in the West, as opposed to, for example, investing in a minimal level of infrastructure that helps our universities and learning institutions build the talent pipeline needed so that then this talent that's inbuilt or grown organically identifies really good use cases, right? That are local, for example, impacting some of the problems I think that Bobina said are a bit low level, like health, agriculture, education, but really make meaningful use cases that show impact. And then we can make a case for investing more in them. So I think for example, the developed world will not commit resources so that, Kirabo, you're able to train your models, right? You can see there's a huge shift now, for example, in philanthropy. The shutting down of USAID is an example. So resources have to be used wisely, right, in our countries. So what you and me as youth leaders can do is agitate for this really like wise distribution of resources, especially to enable the development of talent in our universities, in our tertiary institutions. And so that then once you know how to build, for example, forget large language models or Gen AI models, just foundational machine learning, for example, right? Statistics that, linear regression that works well for some of our really can have a huge impact more than Gen AI. So let's not hyper focus on the really expensive things like, GPUs and Gen AI and LLMs. I dare say that foundational AI, machine learning, can have a much bigger impact, right, on some of the problems we have in the global south, like agriculture, education, and healthcare, without having to invest too much in the new overhyped technologies.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are about to wrap up. I wish we had like 3 hours to keep this conversation going. I guess as we're giving our 30-second closing remarks, John has shared a link in the chat. So if we could all fill out a survey, you can take a few minutes even right as we wrap up to just give us your feedback. But I will come back to our panelists, just 20 seconds. Just give us your parting shots. Eric, we can get started with you.
I'll let everyone else talk first since I've been talking quite a bit.
Thank you. Srija, your closing remarks.
I'm going to close up with what Eric said, right? So I think I'm not going to specifically talk about Africa. Like Maria, I had talked to you yesterday. It's an area that I've told this to Phil too, like an area of that I need to dive deep as a region to understand, right? But my macro level for the group here is to like start small, start on a one real tangible problem. And the real power is not your model, it's your empathy, right? So instead of trying to change the world, to Eric's point, you don't need big, huge, large language model. It could be your even classification model that could really solve a small, tangible problem for your community. That is impact that you're creating, right? So think about a small tangible problem. I wanted to also talk like quickly a snippet from my example recently. And this is to show how much technology is available right now off the bat, right? Like you can just go, you don't need to know AI, you don't need to learn machine learning model training. My kids, 9 and 11-year-old, they recently spun off like an application, a mobile app for a nonprofit organization in a week's time. And they were solving a very small problem. Like when this particular community in the US has a lot of like events, and people can, participate, they can come watch, and all the money that they drew that they fund it for some charity. So instead of, and they had a just rudimentary GoDaddy website. So they converted this into an app, solved the problem. It's everybody's using phone, right? So and they did all this in a week's time, not from like training the model. There are several AI apps like Bolt, Lovable, that can generate code for you, which is like prompt engineering, right? In human language, you tell it and it'll generate code, and it'll show you how to integrate with like the rest of the piece, like how do you deploy the code, how do you deploy the app. Basically it'll help you to develop like small apps. And so there are tools available for you to create small solve big problems with small it's tangible problems with like available technology out in the market. So that's my takeaway for all of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. John, your brief closing remarks.
Yeah, quickly learn how to be curious and be a critical thinker, as Eric and many others mentioned from the early on. And digital skills is very undermined, but like I think it's very important at this age. And I think the best way to learn about AI and ethical AI is by teaching it. So if you are a young person, after this session, share the thoughts, share the links for the resources with your peers and your community. and always be curious and test out, if you have some time, different AI and criticize it as much as possible. That's my contribution.
Thank you so much, John. Bobina?
Not too different from what the other speakers have mentioned. I've also just been thinking, you have a role to play. If we're talking about, being a conscious leader, and also to the idea of global solidarity, that we're in really tumultuous times globally with a lot that's happening, but you have a role to play as well in contributing to this conversation. So we've talked about a lot of the speakers have been talking about the curiosity, educate yourself. So it doesn't mean matter if you're not, a developer per se. You could educate yourself what's happening in the policy space, what are the developments, globally, and try and in your region, and try and keep up, because you need to keep abreast to be able to be the leader that is, letting the rest of your community know, because especially where we come from, you're the person who'll be educating the other people and trying to protect them. But also in your own usage of these tools, right? You're seeing people right now, young people on Twitter, and someone has, pissed you off, and then you're asking Grok to address them, so you have a role as well to play in terms of, being a more decent human being, right? To be a person who is also, is not meting the harm that we're speaking about here, that we're trying to hold big tech and all these other bigger actors accountable, that on a personal level, you have a role to play as well in ensuring that AI is safe and joyful for everyone, as well as we use it. So those will be my parting shots. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Eric, you have 5 seconds, please.
Sure. So I was gonna summarize by saying, like, the ethical AI discussion, the way I would like to conclude, uh, thinking about it, at least for this audience, is I think sometimes the ethical thing to do about AI is not to use it. I think Bobina mentioned the techno-solutionism that, for example, comes with face recognition software. Sometimes the ethical thing to do about AI is to definitely adopt it and then build guardrails about it, but create it from the first place by embedding principles and morals that you care about, right? And for us in the global south, I think it's about community versus capital, right? Ubuntu, versus individualism, right? Greater voice for the youth and the disempowered than for those who are already, empowered and wealthy. And then sometimes the ethical thing to do about AI sometimes is to definitely adopt, right? If AI is going to increase agricultural productivity per acre, we should definitely use it. If AI is going to increase access to healthcare by diagnosing diseases from, radiology images, it's irresponsible not to adopt that AI, right? So I think let's have a wide lens, right, of AI ethical use, where sometimes it's don't use it with guardrails, definitely use it. And I challenge the youth in this group to see where they can play in that spectrum. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful being your moderator today. I hope I have done you all justice. Thank you to our exceptional panelists. I wish we could have like a whole day to just pick your brains more. I hope we will have another session where we can get to hear even more of your thoughts, but thank you so much for taking the time and being here with us today. I think also to everyone who participated today, thank you for being here. I think the most important takeaway that I'm taking from this is that the question we should be asking is not, can we build it? It's should we and for who? If the answers to should we and for who do not exist, there's no need to start. So let's create this beautiful, wonderful future that we want for all of us, consciously and in solidarity. And with that, I believe we have come to the end of today's webinar. I'd like to remind us to please fill in the survey that John wants to make sure that we are receiving feedback and iterating on that feedback. So let's please sort of put in our feedback. I think he's put the link again so that we can make these better and better as we go along. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I hope everyone will have a great day, a great morning, a great evening. Yeah, thank you.